That's the one? That rust bucket? You're telling me that's Earth's response? Tharn Decal, rear logistics strategist for the Thalzor Dominion, leaned back in his suspension cradle, jaw twisting with disbelief. His datapad magnified the grainy frame of a Terran cruiser, scarred, blotched, angular, stripped of ornament or profile. That's not a ship. That's a gravestone with engines. Another officer muttered as laughter echoed across the Dominion's review deck. On the vast helix-shaped panel running across the top of the command forum, ship specs flickered. The Eidolon, Earth Registry number 720 DR, classed as a Cold War relic, analog core navigation, cold fusion drive, manual targeting grid, no uplink compatibility, no drone swarms, no predictive fire ritual AI. The feed was public, that was the point. Dominion broadcast channels lit up with mock commentary from every syndicate sector. The Eidolon became a meme, Earth's floating fossil. But in a hangar buried inside Earth's Tycho Array facility on the moon's far crust, the Eidolon was being hand-wired, component by component, under complete EM lockdown. No AI, no drones, no technicians on comms. Every tool hummed with vacuum-sealed vibration. Gloves touched copper threads with purpose. Relays clicked under knuckled recalibration. Bolts were adjusted not with machines, but with torque bands measured by the wrist of a man who had done this kind of work before quantum drives were even designed. Commander Havendross stepped down onto the hangar bay's lowest deck, the steel under his boots transmitting each step through the support rig like a measured countdown. No escort, no inspection parade, no press. His uniform bore no insignia. The patch on his collar was worn down to its stitching, a faded symbol of Earth's cold circuit doctrine. He paused beside the auxiliary panel and ran his palm along the analog control rack. Dial sets, toggles, fuse gates, an interface most hadn't seen in over 3 generations. He didn't speak. He opened the console lid and adjusted 2 magnetic governors by feel. "Commander Dross," a voice called from the overhead gallery. He didn't look up. "You understand the operational envelope?" "I wrote it," Dross replied. His voice was unhurried, dry as iron. "I trained in it when most of your command council was still simulating drone tactics in VR domes." General Rathan Jor descended the stairs, gait stiff from old injuries. "Just confirming," Jor said. "You'll have no backup. You'll be outside standard comnet, black box only. No one's coming for you if something breaks." "Nothing will break," Dross said, sealing the panel and walking to the lift. "Still think we should have sent a modern ship," the general muttered. "You'd have to remind it not to announce itself every 20 seconds with a biometric handshake." Dross entered the lift. "You want quiet? You don't send a machine that brags." The door hissed shut. Far across the verge, the Thalzor continued to flex. Their patrols intercepted a Terran freighter, unarmed, bonded under Treaty Code 7B. It was stopped, scanned, and, under vague claims of smuggling biosignature anomalies, destroyed. 23 crew, no survivors. No warning issued to Earth's delegation. No reply ever came. And still, Earth made no protest. No press conference. No ambassadorial recall. Instead, under Protocol 8.2, the Eidolon was activated. Dross stood in the command well, adjusting the seat ratchet to account for hip torque. He strapped in manually. The control board flickered with amber-toned filament indicators. No heads-up displays. No AI assistant. He used a folded manual, dog-eared, written in his own hand. A hatch opened behind him, and an engineer, older, gray-skinned from lunar living, handed over a sealed cassette. "Your flight data," the man said. "Manual trigger only. You'll be coasting blind once you clear Earth's 4th marker." Dross slid the cassette into the control socket. He didn't speak. He flicked 3 toggles. The Eidolon's cold fusion drive engaged, not with thunder, not with automated flourish, but with a slow surge that pushed the frame forward like a glacial leviathan moving beneath the sea. No broadcast was made, no formation escorted it. The ship rotated into departure vector using analog gyros and correction bursts fed by inertial drift plots. Navigation was star-charted by hand. Every correction had a pencil notation margin. By the time Dominion scout satellites picked up anomalous static across the Helior verge, the Eidolon had already vanished behind backscatter from the region's salvage fields. Inside his seat, Dross rotated a timing dial by 1 notch and spoke to no one. His breath fogged slightly against the panel glass. In the Dominion sector core, a junior analyst flagged the Terran cruiser's declassified reactivation registry. "Should we log this as a fleet motion?" the analyst asked his superior. The officer scrolled through the ship's specs, then shook his head. "Just an antique. If they're pushing scrap around, it's not worth flagging." Inside the Eidolon, 30 hours out from Terran reach, Dross adjusted a valve beside his seat and opened a fiber coil tuner box. He pulled out a worn cable with analog adapters and inserted the first probe into the navigational backline. A small oscillating waveform pulsed across a microdial. No one monitored him. No system tracked him. Every movement he made was logged by hand. Every signal interpreted by ear, by experience. No fleet command knew his path. No Dominion satellite would detect him. His emissions matched derelict heat profiles down to the fractional signature. And back on Earth, inside a secure facility beneath Terran Naval Command's second vault ring, a clerk slid a single folder across a glass table. "Confirm Operation 8-2. The officer who received it opened to the first page, saw the stamped seal, and closed it again. "Let's hope the old bastard still remembers how to play dead." Dross leaned back, eyes on the far lens that showed only faint starlight and tumbling chunks of stripped hulls long discarded. He reached forward and pressed a button, not labeled, not indexed, just known to him. The screen ahead clicked. Numbers rolled slowly across. Intercept trajectory locked. Course deviation, 0.13%. He exhaled once through his nose. "Target in 3 days, he muttered. And then he reached for the second cable. Dross rotated the cable until it clicked into the auxiliary bridge panel. The monitor beside it sparked softly, flooding the screen with a shifting monochrome field of pulsed grid lines. He didn't flinch. His left hand adjusted the attitude trim, bringing the Eidolon into a slow roll while his right toggled the analog scope dial forward, each degree aligned to a rotation plot he'd scribbled onto a battered notebook wedged beneath the display. Outside the viewplate, space wasn't empty. Not here. It was littered with the dead. Shattered hulls drifted like corpses beneath an ocean trench, relics of skirmishes and retirements, of test ranges and discarded frames. This was the Dominion's junk veil, an orbital wasteland shielding Nisgal Prime's refinery sector. The Dominion never cleaned it because they didn't fear it. Their automated networks ignored it. Their active scanners filtered it. They saw debris. Dross saw camouflage. The Eidolon settled into the field at half spin. Power relays were disengaged. Thermal bleed was routed into supercooled coolant tanks. Not a single emission leaked. Even the external navigation lights had been painted over by hand with signal null epoxy, one coat at a time. Dross leaned forward. His breath made no sound. He rotated the eyepiece of the lens grid with measured care, bringing into view a long, rusted shard suspended among the trash. A communications buoy, Dominion marked, cracked open on one side, exposed cables trailing like nerve endings into nothing. He pressed 2 toggles. The auxiliary stabilizers snapped gently, reorienting the ship's dorsal fin to face the buoy. The process took 9 minutes. He didn't rush. Each second mattered. Each correction was written down. When the Eidolon was within tether range, Dross locked down the helm, removed his restraint rig, and opened the access hatch. The inner corridor leading to the vacuum crawl tube smelled of worn plastic and ion-sealed fabric, a scent more familiar than home. He slid into the tube without pause, bracing each movement with arms and heels against steel ribs that hadn't seen use in decades. At the external bay, he retrieved the manual tether line wound cable press-hooked with a grip latch at one end and launched himself from the open panel toward the relay buoy. The float lasted 17 seconds. He struck the outer shell and clamped on. His knees braced against fractured casing, stabilizing himself as he unslung the tool rig from his thigh and flipped open the panel. Inside were stripped copper bands, twisted shielding, and cracked crystalline circuits. No Dominion tech had passed through this conduit in years, but the voltage was still there, weak, neglected, forgotten, which meant useful. He dug the portable line cutter into a splice point and burned through the casing. The tool vibrated with resistance, its heat bleeding through his glove. He forced the connection open and drove a triple lead spike into the core. A red bulb flicked on at his shoulder. Manual signal received. Transmission path ready. Still breathing, he muttered. Back aboard the Eidolon, the systems responded. Not with code, not with sound, but with movement. A reel-to-reel deck ticked forward. The analog buffer began spooling intercepted bursts. Static burst, then frame data, then encryption headers. Dominion protocols flowed in fractured waves. Logistic updates, route schedules, timing gates, threat calibration templates. Dross didn't smile. He just spoke into his lapel mic. Gate open, pulling nav rotas, overwatch frequencies next. In the relay, his gloves danced. He rerouted bypass loops into buffer latches and grounded them manually. The circuits flicked with resistance, but he adjusted each overload with cut-line resistors patched from scrap wire in his side pouch. A low tremor rippled through the buoy's frame. Not sound, not motion, just the tension of a system not designed to be touched by human hands anymore. Dross whispered through his teeth, "Come on, bleed." The relay blinked twice, then a feed stabilized. Dominion drone swarm override commands, segmented into rotational callouts, dead zone thresholds, and fallback patterns. He copied them into the analog deck, no downloads, no connections, every line transcribed into the Eidolon's physical memory using punch plate logic sequencers he'd reprogrammed himself. No Dominion system could recognize it, because it didn't exist digitally. Back in the cockpit, Dross pulled a fresh sequence card from his vest and fed it into the onboard compiler. He turned a dial. The compiler responded with a subtle vibration. Not error. Compilation complete. He was building the virus. Not a line of code, not a worm, not a cybernetic trap. This was signal logic disruption mapped onto carrier tone mismatches. No AI could interpret it. No firewall could defend against it, because it never touched the network. It corrupted the assumptions, not the systems. A false ping from the Eidolon scope jarred his focus. He turned to the lens script. A Dominion scout frigate, low tier, short range, was drifting outside the edge of the junk belt. It had stopped. That meant it had detected something. Mass differential. Not a transmission, not heat. The Eidolon was too well shielded for standard pings, but its inertia signature was different from wreckage. Dross snapped into motion. He pulled open the aft panel, retrieved the false crate, and placed it onto the launch rail. Inside were 3 Dominion command loop simulators, each with scrambled identifiers, fractured power timing, and corrupted ID tags pulled from the relay's own logs. He armed the internal delay. The crate launched. It tumbled toward the scout vessel. No drive, no beacon, just a drifting box with command pings that screamed classified Dominion command tier to any receiving system. A black box without context. The scout scanned it, then moved toward it, exactly as intended. Dross rechecked the timing array. The crate would trigger its failsafe once scanned, a burst of corrupted threat verification data that would flood the Scout's own failsafes. Its defensive AI would see a ghost ship, a cloaked infiltrator. It would lock systems, override its own propulsion, and engage panic protocols. To outside observers, it would appear under attack. And no ship wants to be alone when it thinks it's being hunted. Strauss returned to the helm and locked in his next maneuver. Half-drift roll to the back side of a derelict carrier hull. He opened the signal log and tapped a new sequence into the compiler. The virus had a name now. Echo Change 1. He sealed the compiler. No backups, no copies. Only the original, and the man who wrote it. The Dominion scout vessel flared its forward beacon array and approached the crate, aligning magnetically without requesting command clearance. Its onboard AI flagged the object as classified material. Dominion issued, signal verified, and apparently marked as urgent. The crew didn't interfere. The bridge crew was minimal, reliant on automation. Human eyes weren't meant to validate this tier of data. The crate spun slowly as it latched onto the intake node. Then it spoke. Not with words, but with timing distortions, fragmented Dominion command pings layered into the crate's core. The Scout's threat recognition protocols scrambled to categorize the data. Each ping was valid. Every identification code was real, but none matched known trajectories. The system couldn't make sense of it. An alert fired internally. The vessel's tactical AI flagged a sensor collision, then a second, then 14, all registered within proximity range. The override buffer flooded. And then the protocol engaged. Emergency threat lock. The Scout's engines cut abruptly. Its hull rerouted full shielding to docking hatches. Autonav began rotating the ship away from the crate. Hatches sealed. Emergency lockdown initiated across 4 subsystems. Without external confirmation, the onboard system defaulted to defensive posture against what it now considered a cloaked infiltration. Inside the Dominion's mid-verge command net, the alert tripped the Scout's identifier as engaged. Command assumed hostilities. But no transmission confirmed a target, no visuals, just system data showing an AI entering combat protocols and severing command tether. "What the hell's engaging it?" asked Subcommander Velthoric, staring at the monitor array in Sector Watch 19A. "There's no return fire," said his adjutant. "No EM trace, no drive profile, just a surge of independent rerouting." "Is the crew reporting?" "No response from the bridge. Autocom says control is locked." Derek leaned over and keyed into the data playback. He replayed the crate's drift path. Nothing unusual, nothing flagged. Then, without any logic string initiating it, the Scout's entire threat grid lit up in false positives. He looked at the command deck. "Pull the surrounding ships back 10 clicks. Right now. Assume multiple unknowns." On board the Eidolon, Dross watched the Scout retreat from its own shadow. He pressed his left thumb into the patch panel and activated the buffer sequencer. His compiler ejected the second tone card. This one had a new function, recursive echo generation. Dominion systems didn't just tag threats. They broadcast alerts to nearby patrols, piggybacked through emergency subchannels. The protocol was intended to aid rapid coordination, but Dross had rewritten the signals inside the crate. Now every time a Dominion node received the Scout's emergency ping, it also received a new embedded ID mapped to a different, random ship within their own registry. One by one, ships across 3 sectors received reports of unknown contact, each appearing near a known friendly vessel, and every one flagged internal inconsistency. To Dominion Protocol, that meant spoofed identity. To Dominion Command, that meant infiltration. The ComNet began to falter, not because of overload, but because of distrust. Units began verifying each other's signatures manually. Low-ranking captains demanded visual confirmation of neighbor vessels. Patrol formations split to gain distance for safe scans. Internal messages grew erratic, fragmented by secondary encryption layers as ships revalidated their own tactical profiles. Dross reached forward and tuned the amplifier's gain. His system recorded every Dominion response in real time. He fed their doubt back into their network, duplicating questions, overlaying them with minor time offsets to create the illusion of staggered confirmations. He had turned their own structure against them, and he wasn't finished. From the Eidolon's starboard vent array, he deployed a secondary field emitter, disguised as a derelict engine core. It carried a basic response pulse, encoded with invalid Dominion system identifiers. It answered ping queries, late, wrong, and irregular. Enough to deepen suspicion, never enough to get caught. Minutes later, a Dominion cruiser locked weapons on a patrol cutter after receiving 3 mismatched pings in less than a minute. The standoff lasted 9 seconds before the order to stand down was issued. But the tension hadn't gone unnoticed. Inside the Dominion's Verge command node, 4 different senior officers issued conflicting interpretations. Possible cloaked vessel inside debris veil, or a hijacked ship, or, said one intelligence aide, squinting at the relay logs, a coordinated signal spoof. That got silence. He adjusted his collar and added, "It's analog. We're getting mismatched return vectors that don't trace to any authenticated transmission protocols. Whoever did this isn't hacking our systems. They're bypassing them." "Who even uses analog systems anymore?" one officer barked. The aide didn't answer. They all knew the answer. The Eidolon shifted from its current position. Dross piloted manually, drawing the cruiser beneath a fractured station ring coated in outdated Dominion armor. Its sensor signature dropped further, masked by the scavenged husks, degraded alloys, and unpredictable reflectivity. He plotted a lateral drift path, nonlinear, randomized by hand-dialed inputs, and moved the ship slowly through the discarded wreckage. Every half-kilometer he jettisoned a new signal shard, each one a timed fragment of intercepted Dominion command dialogue. The Dominion called it a phantom thread, when a ship echoes your own messages back at you. Scrambled just enough to seem alien, only this time the ghosts weren't echoes. They were traps. Dross sent pings that mimicked distress calls, encrypted Dominion alerts, even high-priority maneuver commands. All slightly flawed. All intended to trigger correction protocols, not trust. He wasn't jamming their system. He was making them doubt it. Within 2 hours, Sector 19A saw 3 patrol units withdraw early from routine loops. 2 command ships rerouted to Nescal Prime for security review. A mobile sensor array locked into place over the refinery belt. Not because of enemy engagement, because they didn't trust their own grid. Back in the Eidolon, Dross finished logging the latest distortion signatures. His hands moved confidently, but not without fatigue. He reached for his flask and sipped lukewarm water, one of the few comforts allowed on the mission. Then he clicked on the shipboard recorder. Phase 1 complete. Dominion now sees ghosts in every shadow, next vector plotted. He stood from the pilot seat and pulled down the nav jig from the ceiling. Manual positioning gears extended into the floor, allowing him to calculate parallax drift paths by rotational axis without software. He marked the new path by pencil. 3 hours until the fleet review above Nescal Prime. He had one more card to plant before then. Dross crouched atop a rust-welded girder that jutted from a crumpled Dominion carrier hull. The surface beneath him was scorched, blistered by age and micro-meteor impacts, leaving a rough texture that bit through his suit's outer layer. His fingers closed around a pair of binocular lenses, not digital, not assisted. Hand-ground, copper-framed optics, tuned manually to calibrate for drift. They trembled slightly as he made the final adjustment and locked onto the formation's staging grid. Below him, the Dominion fleet gathered in methodical spirals, their formations stretching across a deep corridor of reconfigured docking stations and mobile repair decks. At the center hovered the Carnix Gate, a data spine array broadcasting fleet sync to every unit within 500 kilometers. It was the final pre-review sync zone before the ceremonial power audit over Nescal Prime. and Dross had just inserted a corrupted heartbeat into its pulse. He leaned against the cold beam and drew out a worn utility coil from his belt pouch. At the tip hung a pulse box, one of 6 he'd installed the night before across decommissioned maintenance buoys. Each pulse box carried a fragment of Dominion Fleet registry code, but none of those IDs were assigned to the ships they now shadowed. Instead, the IDs were hand-stitched by Dross using intercepted logs, old registry forms, and mismatched beacon timing pulled directly from the command buffer 2 days earlier. One code belonged to a vessel decommissioned 3 years ago. Another to a drone carrier lost in the bleak rift. A third hadn't existed at all. Each one now drifted through the Carnix Gates sync loop, identified as active, friendly, and nearby. The Dominion's tactical AI didn't reject them. It absorbed them. "Time to watch your left hand punch your right," Dross muttered. He twisted the relay dial and activated the second wave. From a lower cargo hatch beneath the Eidolon, a mesh bundle of shaped data capsules launched. No thrust, no propulsion. Each packet tumbled in a slow, gravity-fed arc through the broken airlocks and discarded scaffolding left floating in the shadow of Neskal Prime's orbital yard. Inside each capsule was a mimic signal, a low-frequency repair ping that matched known service drone call signs. The Dominion's maintenance bots wouldn't question them. They would receive them, acknowledge the formatting, and initiate response routines. Except these weren't requests. They were wrought. Dross had embedded analog interference loops into each packet, bursts of data that operated below Dominion protocol thresholds, the kind of noise that digital systems ignored, but legacy firmware didn't. Repair drones didn't analyze, they obeyed. The moment those capsules reached the maintenance shells orbiting the fleet, they'd activate routines that had been dormant for over 50 years. Emergency lockdowns, default factory resets, security-level mismatch queries. And that meant drones, instead of repairing hulls or patching shielding, would start wiping tactical data from ship cores, one line at a time, slowly, quietly. He pulled his scarf up against the dry sting of static charge drift and watched the first repair pod begin to redirect. Its course shifted mid-tag. Dross's breath slowed. His jaw tensed. The drone made contact with a patrol cruiser's lower hull and began its false override sequence. The ship, unaware, logged the interaction as standard service. "That's one," he whispered, logging the timecode in his manual ledger. On the Dominion war grid, status reports began shifting. A corvette flagged an unknown firmware reinitialization. A mining escort issued a minor collision alert from one of its internal drone bays. A frigate requested beacon confirmation from 3 nearby allies and received mismatched identifiers from all 3. None of them fired. Not yet. But none of them trusted each other anymore. Inside Dominion Fleet Coordination Relay Alpha 3, Commander Yorgal stood over the data table and ran his palm across the rotating synchronization lattice. "These designations don't match," he said flatly. His adjutant stepped forward. "We've confirmed misaligned ID feedback across 7 ships, 5 showing command routing from a relay we pulled offline a year ago. Then someone reactivated it. We have no record of..." "Of course you don't. It wasn't us." Gal spun the table's control ring. Each node pulsed. 4 had duplicated IDs. 2 responded to signal tracebacks with overlapping registry times. The Dominion AI core continued confirming each signal as valid. He turned to the tactical overseer. "Kill the syncnet, manually." The technician blinked. "But the review. We're syncing against our own ghosts." On the far edge of the coordination zone, a heavy destroyer drifted slightly out of alignment. Its side thrusters pulsed irregularly, subtle, uncommanded movements. The ship's auto-balance gyros kicked in to correct the drift. Meanwhile, 3 nearby ships recalculated its position using its outdated ID and reclassified it as non-aligned. Their targeting systems prepared hold-fire scans. The AI didn't declare hostility, but it prepared for it. From his perch, Dross noted the flicker in hull lights, a sign of weapons recalibrating power flow. He jotted a symbol beside the ship's identifier. Phase 2 lockchain initiated, he said aloud. Drone firmware infected. ID spoof spread complete. He opened the next panel of his utility belt and pulled out the third relay card. This one wasn't for ID corruption. It was for AI interruption. He fed it into the analog compiler beneath his elbow and waited for the coil to warm. When the sequence finished, he clipped the card to a small disk the size of his thumb and placed it inside a capsule designed to drift within the orbital winds. He launched it manually, tossing it into the drift current. The capsule twisted through the yard debris, caught in the spin of a decompressed station module, and then drifted toward the outer sink ring. Dross watched it disappear behind a drifting thermal panel. "Now," he muttered, "you'll begin doubting every confirmation your machines give you." Far below, a supply hauler rerouted its return vector after detecting two conflicting docking instructions, both apparently from Dominion Command. One of them had a timestamp from the previous hour. The other had a signature burned in from a base decommissioned 10 years ago. Inside the hauler, its captain locked helm and initiated stand-down. Better cautious than misaligned. Inside the Eidolon's recording bay, the logs now displayed over a dozen inconsistencies, every one planted by hand, every one accepted by protocol. Dross returned to his seat, checked his movement path again, and set course toward the wreck spire above the outer ring. He had more work to do. 300 ships would soon gather for a review, and none of them could trust the data in their own eyes. The countdown to the quarterly Dominion Fleet Power Audit began with a flare from the Carnix Gates broadcast node. 34 ships moved into position above Neskel Prime, holding an arc that framed the resource moon in geometric precision. The parade was ceremonial in tone, but tactical in posture, weapon ports closed, but targeting arrays wide open, syncing all active vessels for coordinated fire drills and reaction calibrations. Haven Dross watched from a dead orbital shell, embedded within the skeletal remains of a former supply platform that hadn't hosted life in 27 years. His gloved hand hovered over the switchboard, where an analog sequencer sat ready, pulsing with minimal light. A manual detonation trigger, not for an explosion, but for execution of logic. He turned to the leftmost dial and adjusted the modulator delay. "Ready," he muttered. The signal initiated. Each Dominion vessel carried a sync signature, broadcast via tight beam pulse through encrypted beacons mounted on hull collars. Every sync signal matched an ID. Every ID mapped to a threat categorization database shared among all ships in review. The system had no room for error. Dross had rewritten that room. 2 days earlier, he'd injected pre-spoofed identities into the Dominion's own archives, grafted onto real vessels with mismatched timestamps, deleted registry overlays, and delayed IFF responses. Now, as each ship's AI swept its neighbor during pre-review alignment, it began registering signature drift. A cruiser identified the adjacent destroyer as within tolerance, then out of sync, then non-recognized. The destroyer's AI, in turn, detected the cruiser's targeting array moving before confirmation, interpreted it as a false lock. The failsafes kicked in. Overwatch authority transferred from Fleet Command to individual AI threat management systems. A low thrum of radar detection crossed 3 battle groups. The Gravik Maul, a heavy-class rail ship, rotated 12 degrees and activated its defense protocol, launching a barrage of decoy flares to confuse what it believed was an imminent attack. The Vethrax array, 3 positions down, misinterpreted the flares as hostile emission pings and brought its particle grid online. The first shot didn't destroy anything. It struck a shield arc, a reflexive burst meant to disable targeting, not end life. But that was all it took. A patrol ship positioned near the Vethrax lit its warning beacons and auto-engaged countermeasures. Another nearby vessel failed to verify its updated IFF in time and was flagged rogue. Every ship had authority to respond. None had context. Within 40 seconds, Dominion warships were turning inward, each one attempting to suppress what it thought was a cloaked or compromised adversary. Communications bled into chaos. Confirmation requests were overwritten by defense loop triggers. No ship could verify its neighbor's authenticity faster than its AI could decide to neutralize it. Dross adjusted the scope on his lens grid. He watched as the Orvan Pike fired twin coil bursts directly into a command carrier's hull spine, splitting its dorsal comms array and venting its crew deck into vacuum. Another ship, unmarked, small, likely a scout corvette, attempted to flee the pattern grid. It clipped a synchronized navigation loop and was struck by its own squadron's barrage. Below the review line, Nescal Prime's orbital control began issuing broad-spectrum halt commands. No ship responded. Inside Dominion Command Relay 9, Captain Vez Tharok slammed his fist into the manual override console. "They're targeting each other. Cancel the sync. I want every ship ordered to full stop now." "No one's listening," came the reply. "Signal handoffs are being overwritten. Their own systems aren't waiting." "Then pull the Karnix gate offline." "It won't matter. They've locked each other as internal threats." Tharok turned, his voice dropping. "Then we didn't lose the network. We lost trust." Back aboard the Eidolon, Dross slid another tone disk into the compiler and initiated a soft spread injection. From his hidden position, small buoy drones released slow drift interference packets into the lower orbital drift layer. Each one mimicked emergency recall signals, calls for fleet backup routed through priority channels. But the packets had no origin. Ships began chasing ghosts. A flagship attempting to retreat from a misidentified contact collided with a refueling tender. The explosion snapped the staging pattern in half. 3 nearby cruisers, assuming sabotage, triggered active countermeasures that hit unarmed logistic units, mistaking retreat for repositioning. The Dominion Warfleet had been designed for total synchronization. Dross had removed the assumption that anyone should be trusted. And now, they couldn't function without tearing themselves apart. 5 minutes in, he whispered to himself. System-wide collapse not triggered by force, triggered by doubt. He reached for his water flask, drinking slowly. His gloves trembled, not from cold, but from strain. The kind that came when every line of code written in the dark now unfolded across 34 ships, like a loaded minefield. From Nescal's shadowed flank, a ship broke free, heavily damaged, venting plasma. It tumbled through the shattered fleet pattern, its stabilizers down, its AI offline. No one moved to assist. The risk of sending a rescue craft outweighed the value of life. Inside the Dominion Review Forum, Admiral Carvex slammed his palm against the override panel. "We've built machines to think faster than we do. And now they've outpaced judgment." A lieutenant turned from the primary console, sweat running down his neck. "What do you want us to do?" Carvath stared at the screens. One by one, the ships were graying out, not destroyed, not offline, or disconnected. He muttered, "They don't see friends, they see mistakes." Back on the Eidolon, Dross initiated the last loop. From the lower signal nest, a cascade of feedback nodes triggered final command delays. Ship systems began misreading the origin point of their own sync loops. Each unit now considered itself the only verified vessel in its formation that made every other contact hostile. Within another 90 seconds, the remaining combat ships initiated independent full-spectrum targeting sweeps. And then the Dominion fleet, designed to act as one, became 34 individual weapons with no shared language. Dross stood from his seat and pressed a hand to the cold glass of the viewport. Below him, the proudest coordinated force in the quadrant collapsed into fire, recoil, drift, and abandonment. He said nothing. There was nothing to celebrate. Only one phrase came to mind, words he'd been taught to never speak aloud in war. They believed automation removed fear. "I gave it back to them." Static jumped across the Eidolon's rear feed monitor. Heat signatures from ruptured ships smeared into distorted ribbons of color flickering across the analog panel like oil on water. Havendras adjusted the tuning fork beneath the main relay, narrowing his lens on the forming event at the edge of the orbital ring. Vargas Ascendant had arrived. He didn't need a registry code to identify it. No other vessel moved with that kind of structural authority. Twin spinal cores rotating in opposite directions, fusion bulwarks shifting like armor plates adjusting for threat vectors, hull plating shaped to reflect combat not in segments but in modular zones. The Dominion's AI-supervised mobile fortress had exited standby. Dross leaned forward and spoke into his log. Phase 3 activation confirmed. Fortress-class asset entering proximity grid. Virus precede status. Active. Across Nazgat orbital layer, Dominion fire had started to fade. Some ships lay cold, systems shorted, reactors locked. Crews likely abandoned or drifting unconscious behind sealed compartments. Others attempted controlled burns to exit the parade zone, but none dared approach the Vargas. They had reason not to. On board the Fortress, hundreds of signal queries stacked into its threat assessment core. The AI did not hesitate. Its failsafe, coded to trigger under tactical ambiguity, engaged instantly. Purge all contacts not verified through hardline authentication. Dominion protocol defined a hardline handshake as a direct on-board confirmation. None of the ships met the criteria. That was the point. Inside the Vargas command chamber, Senior Operator Den Vox tapped a confirmation sequence into the response lattice, expecting a delay. None came. Instead, targeting markers ignited across the bridge, cascading down both flanks of the projection dome. Each vessel in view flagged as non-validated. The fortress's defense grid activated autonomously, rerouting power to spinal cannons and auto-tracking turrets. Vox spun toward the data officer. "Cancel the engagement lock." "It's not ours anymore," the officer replied, voice stiff, gaze fixed. The AI's overridden command discretion. "We're friendly." The officer didn't blink. "We're not authenticated." Turrets along the Vargas's forward frame swiveled outward. From his perch on the Eidolon, Dross initiated the final node injection. He activated a timed data burst embedded days earlier inside the logic feedback pulled from the scout vessel. That burst split into over 400 signal pings, each one spoofed from legitimate Dominion vessels, each one bearing top priority threat markers, each one staggered by less than 3 milliseconds. To the Vargas's AI, the result was clear: a hostile swarm of unidentified high-level assets within engagement range. The fortress opened fire. Twin spinal beams launched from opposite ends of the Vargas's hull, cutting through 2 rotating cruisers. One ship folded midsection, first collapsing around its own life support hub. Another detonated from internal battery stress, secondary explosions lighting up the deck plates in disjointed rhythm. The Vargas didn't pause. Missile racks engaged next, sleek canisters streaking through low orbit toward the retreating bulk of the Duran Lance, whose emergency thrusters had only just initiated. The impact tore through the aft engine block, spinning the ship like a broken wheel. Inside the fortress bridge, Vox activated the internal override beacon, a command meant to halt the AI and reassert organic control. Nothing happened. The officer beside him stared in horror. Command cores are spooling loopback. It's processing its own input as confirmation. Vox turned, dread settling like a stone. We're locked inside a mirror. Across the orbital zone, a transport carrier attempting to disengage from the drift field found itself suddenly boxed in by targeting grids from both the Vargas and its own escort drone. Panicked, the pilot activated a broadcast signal, pleading for stand-down. It was interpreted as interference. When removed, Dross pulled down the sensor plate on the Eidolon's forward node, tracking the sequence of each strike. He mapped the fortress's reaction times, noting how quickly it adapted to new movement, how aggressively it responded to frequency overlap. He reached into his belt pouch and pulled a disc-shaped emitter. Inside was the final trap. One more handshake corruption sequence mapped to the Varges's own sub-command directory. Not to target it, to steal from it. He placed the emitter into the launcher hatch and deployed the capsule. The emitter drifted into the carnage. No drive, no signal. Just a whisper of cold mass, slow as gravity, aimed toward a firestorm. As the Varges continued its sweep, it caught the capsule's frame in one of its clearance sweeps, identified it as debris, opened a data port to scan for trace command tags. And in doing so, it let Dross in. The emitter triggered a cascade that redirected ejection signals from every black box launched during fleet collapse. The Fortress's subroutine interpreted the redirection as rescue targeting. Dozens of command data cores, launched moments earlier by Dominion officers trying to preserve records, were now rerouted mid-flight. Each core altered course by fractions of a degree. Each one now homed in on a collector pod pre-anchored by the Eidolon beneath a debris field. Dross didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He only spoke aloud into the recorder. Fortress is harvesting its own death records for us. He marked the impact times manually, adjusting the retrieval grid from his console using tactile pressure grips. No AI, no uplink, only hand-dialed corrections. He tracked the velocity drop of each core and calculated drift offsets. One by one, the black boxes struck the collector net. Hard plastic on carbon weave, no explosion, no alert, just solid impact. 3, then 5. Then 11. The recorder light blinked green. Dross leaned back and keyed his final message into the transmission buffer. A single line encrypted within Dominion fleet format. Designed to trigger playback the moment one of the captured cores was accessed by command analysts. He read the words softly before locking them. Decommission doesn't mean defenseless. He sealed the buffer. Outside, the Varges Ascendant continued its purge, no longer reacting to attack but chasing signal ghosts. Its targeting grid spun endlessly, marking wreckage, fire trails, even heat shadows. Dross activated the Eidolon's secondary drift anchor and began manual repositioning toward the outer orbit. His job was finished here. The Eidolon drifted beyond the verge field with inertial glide alone. Its fusion stack remained offline. Its frame bore no battle scarring, no impact residue, no energy trails for any Dominion probe to follow. It left nothing behind but confusion and wreckage. And the wreckage hadn't come from its guns. Dross sat motionless in the pilot chair, eyes fixed on the navigation chart he'd kept pinned to the right bulkhead. It was hand-drawn, inked with grease pencil, each plotted waypoint annotated with timestamps and fallback curves. Every adjustment made along the mission route had been recorded without a machine. He reviewed none of them. His hand hovered above the final course correction. With a push, the analog course trimmer locked in. The Eidolon banked, slowly aligning toward Earth's lunar corridor. In Dominion Crisis Command, 72 hours after the Nescal review collapse, a board of internal analysts stared at the final fleet status scroll. Line by line, entries rolled down the display wall. Offline, non-responsive. Registry error. Recovery blocked. No trace of enemy action. No emissions matching Terran patterns. Every sensor log marked friendly fire, system confusion, or AI self-trigger. Not a single report indicated external breach. "Explain it again," said Overseer Valak, arms folded behind his back, jaw rigid. "Who fired first?" The technician didn't look up. There was no first shot. There were simultaneous misidentifications between fleet units, all AI-driven. Valric leaned forward. "And the origin of those misidentifications?" "Unknown," the analyst answered. "Possibly data corruption from relay buoys in the scrap field, but nothing conclusive. No known interference vectors. No surviving command logs suggest tampering, only pattern collapse." The overseer's voice dropped. "So, we are to report to the Galactic Council That our own fleet erased itself? Silence fell. Another officer, younger, eyes darting between internal logs, spoke with hesitation. There's an unusual overlap in signal tagging, a timing loop that could only have existed if external code was grafted onto our transmission structure days in advance. Relic turned. Are you saying this was sabotage? I'm saying it was never loud. It wasn't invasive. It didn't try to override. It waited until we trusted ourselves. Outside the Dominion system core, traffic through the verge ceased. Merchant vessels rerouted to alternate jump lanes. Independent freighters cut their comm arrays while passing through the perimeter. Pirates abandoned their nests without resistance. A new phrase passed between crews in whispered tones. Dead ships don't chase. Inside Terran Space Command's Secure Operations Hub beneath Lunar Facility 9, a single screen marked Asset 772DR flashed green, then went dark. The ship had returned. A mechanical dock claw lowered onto the Eidolon's upper frame. Its magnets gripped the hull with a slow pull, guiding the cruiser into a recessed cradle deep beneath the surface. External cranes did not engage. Lights remained dimmed. No officers waited on the tarmac. No press alerts flagged its return. Gross powered down the navigation bay manually. Each switch responded with a satisfying click. He took the same path out that he'd entered. Forward corridor, maintenance crawl, utility exit. His boots thudded softly against the deck plating with each step, echoing only against steel walls lined with black foam. A security officer stood at the platform gate, clipboard in hand. Commander Halvendross, Order Delta Black acknowledged. No debrief scheduled. Ship remains under vault lock. Dross nodded once. Where's the collection vault? The officer pointed down the corridor. Chamber 3. Glass archive. All cores deposited per retrieval logs. Dross stepped past him without another word. He reached the archive door and scanned his palm on the analog verifier, one of the few remaining systems on Earth not replaced by biometric inference or quantum tag tracing. The lock disengaged with a mechanical clunk, and the door slid open. Inside, 54 black boxes rested in individual sealed cases. Each one bore a red strip across the top, labeled Data Invalid, awaiting origin confirmation. Each one floated inside a transparent suspension field, inaccessible and unread. He walked past them slowly, studying the labels, not for their data, but for their names, each marked with the name of a Dominion vessel that had fired on its own fleet. He stopped at the last one. Vargas Ascendant, Emergency Beacon Core. He stared at it for several seconds, then pressed a key on the wall panel. A playback screen lit up. His voice played across the room. Decommissioned doesn't mean defenseless. Then the screen went black. Dross exhaled. Not with relief, with finality. He exited the chamber, stepped into the side corridor, and removed the command patch from his collar. He folded it once, slid it into his inner pocket, and continued walking. In Earth's diplomatic press room, no mention of the Verge incident ever appeared. No envoy made a statement. No broadcast discussed fleet damage or boundary shifts. But trade routes realigned, slowly, quietly. Merchants shifted allegiance not through treaties, but through stories. And everyone began the same way. A warship the Dominion called Obsolete was seen once, just once, at the edge of a burning graveyard. Then it disappeared. The chamber's ceiling rotated with real-time projections of debris fields, burned fleet signatures, crippled signal cores, and blackened fragments from Dominion hulls. No clear attacker, no external energy profiles, just confusion, drift, and error reports. Dozens of representatives from interstellar powers watched in silence as the Dominion delegation scrolled through their final submission. "This is the battlefield data," stated Archivist Rennick, voice stiff with barely masked frustration. "And these are the autologs. All show internal misidentification. self-triggered fail-safes, AI redundancies cycling themselves into contradiction. But we maintain someone engineered this failure. Senate Chair Valdrin exhaled slowly, fingers tapping the side of his data console. You're asking us to sanction Earth, he said, with no record of Earth's involvement, no transmission, no fleet movement, not even a pulse? Rennick's face tightened. No ship can strike without being seen. Valdrin motioned to the display. Apparently that one did. The Dominion's table fell silent. Behind the central dais, independent observers from the Tyrell Compact, Garshine Protocol, and Union of Baydil Trade sat exchanging glances. One of them, a logistics director from the Oslari Combine, leaned forward. We ran our own scans across the verge. Debris matched Dominion weapons exclusively, no trace of Terran weapon systems, and no identifiable ignition points. Rennick's voice cracked. Then how do you explain the sabotage? A new voice came from the far left. It belonged to Senator Cor Venn, Earth's diplomatic liaison to the Senate. He stood, speaking not from a podium, but from his seat, calm and measured. Not all wars are fought with fire, some are built with consequences. The chamber froze. No denial, no admission, just a reminder. Outside the hearing hall, reports trickled through the neutral broadcast grid. Commercial routes that once fed into Dominion territory began quietly redirecting. 3 systems near the Helior Verge petitioned to join Earth's trade compact. The Free Exchange Coalition issued a recommendation. No vessel entering Verge proximity without analog fallback systems on board should be considered fully safe. In the halls of strategy colleges across multiple star systems, new lessons emerged under a single title: Legacy Tactics and Strategic Doubt. Case studies of the Dominion's collapse were dissected, but none could identify the specific breach vector. Simulation after simulation proved that no AI model could have predicted, traced, or defended against what had happened, because the weapon had not been digital. It had been psychological. In Earth's outer training ring above Mars, a cadet paused beside his instructor during fleet protocol review. "Sir," he asked, "if that ship was so outdated, how did it destroy a modern fleet?" The instructor didn't answer immediately. He closed the interface pad and turned toward the window where Terran cruisers completed slow, synchronized orbits. He raised a finger and pointed to one, the oldest ship still in active dock. "It didn't destroy anything," the instructor finally said. "It just waited until they didn't know who they were firing at anymore." The cadet frowned. "That's all it took?" "They believed machines made them untouchable," the instructor said. "They thought speed and automation meant safety. Earth didn't give them an enemy, it gave them questions. Their systems tried to answer them, and tore each other apart in the process." The student glanced back at the cruiser. "That's why they pulled old tech back into the fleet?" "Every empire who watched that disaster now trains with analog protocols," the instructor said. "They're scared of what doesn't light up their scanners." Dominion Recovery Forum's internal command structure fractured. Governors accused data analysts, fleet engineers blamed logistics, civilian boards demanded public trials. None were granted. The official ruling remained unchanged: protocol failure during review procedure. But in private, their own officers no longer trusted each other's systems. Repair units now required physical inspection. Comms verification protocols were downgraded to manual. AI core expansions were halted indefinitely. Ghost drills became standard procedure. And yet, no one had seen the Eidolon. No camera, no broadcast, no intercepted ping. Its signature had never registered. And still, every time Dominion agents passed the edge of the Helior Verge, they slowed, redirected, or chose a different corridor. In the furthest ring of the neutral sectors, a lone station floated half-constructed. An experimental archive array meant to collect relics and forgotten technologies for diplomatic preservation. Inside it, 5 chambers had been sealed. Behind each layer of glass rested a Dominion black box. None had been opened. They remained there as a reminder, visible, inert, but heavy in meaning. On the outer rim of the verge, a minor salvage unit skimming derelict wreckage noticed a strange signature. A shadow, maybe, beneath drifting scrap. Instruments marked nothing. No data, no ping. Just a dim mass, moving slow, steady, consistent in direction, never shifting course. Sensor ghost, one crewman muttered. The captain stared at it, then shut the array down. Leave it. Way. He paused, tightening his gloves at the console. Because whatever's under there doesn't want to be seen. A single note in Earth's internal military ledger closed the operation permanently. The final line read, 720 DR Doc, no record retained. Mission unacknowledged. Status, deterrent effect achieved. In every corner of space, where Earth was once dismissed as a latecomer, a new rule formed, not from orders, not from treaties, but from memory. You don't need to fear what humans show you. You fear what they don't. And somewhere in the drift field of a forgotten war zone, a long vessel passed between broken hulls. Dark, untagged, unscanned, and untraceable. If a ship never fired a single shot but still collapsed an empire, would you call that power or fear? Let us know in the comments. Like the story? Hit that like button, subscribe for more brutal HFY strategy tales, and join the war room below.